This is a story that has stayed with Montreal for decades, and it became a media favorite due to the extremely strange behavior of one of the victims' parents. Chantal Dupont is 15 years old. She's with her sister and her boyfriend's little brother Maurice, who is 14 years old. It's summer in Quebec and it is really nice out. They go and see a concert at this big square, which in the 70s was a popular music venue. But after expecting rock and actually getting folk, Chantal and Mauris decide to leave the venue early and they decide to walk home. Unknown to them, their night is about to take a turn for the worst. It's a beautiful summer evening, and to get home they need to walk across the Jacque-Cartier Bridge, which crosses the Saint Laurent River from Montreal Island to the South Shore for a span of 3 kilometers. It's on this bridge that they will end up living out the worst minutes of their lives. They come across 2 men. The men are armed, one with a gun and one with a knife. They didn't know it, but these men had been waiting for them in a bush like prey. They are Gilles Pimpare, 26, and Norman Guerin, 25 years old. They use their weapons to intimidate the young pair, Chantal and Mauris, into giving them any valuables that they have. They're kids in the 70s, so they don't have much. Maurice gives Pimpare everything he has, $2. Chantal has nothing. They then drag the kids down to a beam that hangs over the edge of the bridge. All that separates them from a huge fall to the river beneath is a little bit of guard wire. They throw Maurice up against the wire and hold him there, threatening to throw him off. Then they begin taking turns of SAing Chantal. Maurice is forced to witness what is happening. Then Pimpare tells Maurice that because of what he has just seen, he will have to die. Maurice is in a state. He's very aware he's going to die and he begs through his tears for Pimpare and Guerin to kill him before they throw him into the water. So they begin to strangle him with a rope until he loses consciousness. Then they throw him down to the water from a height of roughly 50 meters. Chantal, bleeding and in pain from her attack, knows her fate. She too is then thrown from the bridge. The official cause of death of both victims is drowning. Although they had both been strangled, they were both still living when they had been thrown from the bridge. Their parents report their children missing to the police immediately, and a search party begins. For 8 days, a team look for the 2 teenagers until finally finding them in the river Saint Laurent. Gilles Pimpare had a very bad upbringing. He was constantly beaten by his father, even SA'd, while his mother was just as bad. When she was mad, she would hit him across the head with an ice hockey stick or even a broom. By the time he was 12, he had become an extremely violent child, of whom his sisters were terrified. He would often threaten them with knives, and on one occasion he severely burns one of his sister's arms with some kitchen utensils. He was kicked out of school for an episode with the principal, in which he was to be punished for disrupting class. Back in those days, it was with a belt. So the principal began hitting Gilles with the belt when something unexpected happened. Gilles grabs hold of the belt and begins hitting the principal back. Immediate expulsion, and then he is sent to a school for delinquents. And this is where he meets Norman Guerin. These 2 were incorrigible, and together they began drinking, taking drugs, stealing cars, robbing convenience stores, and worse, this is when they began their string of SAs. In the summer of 79, Pimpare and Guerin had begun hanging out in the Six Flags amusement park called La Ronde, which is situated at one end of the Jacque-Cartier Bridge. Over the month of June, the pair had robbed 9 people and SA'd 2 women, although they had never been caught. However, they had allegedly never killed. So what changed on the 3rd of July? They see Maurice and Chantal crossing the bridge and they rob them and assault Chantal. But why did they kill them? Their clothes are stained with blood, but somewhat unfazed by what has just happened, they go and grab a pizza with the €2 they stole from Maurice. Once the investigation into the murders is opened, many witnesses come forward, reporting that Guerin and Pimpare had tried to do the same thing to them. For the police, the culprits were clear. And luckily for them, they were already in custody for a different crime that they had committed in June. So the investigators decide to question them about the bridge murders. To their surprise, Norman Guerin confesses everything about the double murder, but he claims that the murders were accidental. Both men receive life sentences. You hear a lot about police brutality. People kept asking me if I felt like pounding them after we heard those terrible confessions, but I didn't. I just felt weak. These murders created a city full of angry parents who knew that their children were no longer safe with the current state of the police force. So they began a media campaign to pin the blame on the Minister of Justice in Quebec, Marc-André Bedard, for the lack of police integrity, not just for the bridge murders, but for a string of 228 serious cases of SA that had seen extremely feeble repercussions within the justice system, if any. For the 5 years leading up to the bridge murders, there had been increasing numbers of children being murdered in Montreal. Although some of the cases had been solved, the people of Montreal felt like the punishments were not equivalent to the severity of the crimes being committed, and they felt like parole was given much too quickly to serious criminals. This is far from where this story ends. This is where it gets really weird. During the trial, Chantal Dupont's parents were present. But something very strange was unfolding. They knew the fate that their daughter had suffered that night on the bridge with Norman and Gilles, yet somehow, for some reason, they can't stop staring at them across the courtroom and smiling. Then, at the end of the trial, Louis Dupont, Chantal's dad, approaches Norman's mother, and without prompt, he tells her that he forgives her. Then, the Dupont parents go one step further. They begin sending Norman letters in prison, once again stating that they have completely forgiven him. They are extremely Catholic, and their letters imply that through forgiving Norman, they are offering their daughter to God. Then, they begin to visit Norman. They build a relationship, and the whole thing is so bizarre or wonderful. A relationship between the victim's parents and the murderer that somebody makes a documentary out of it. And the documentary is called Le Pardon, or Forgiveness. In the finale of the documentary, we see Norman meeting Chantal's parents. They all come together and hug, and they're all crying what seems like tears of joy. But then Louis Dupont, Chantal's dad, says that this is the most beautiful moment in my life. What? When they go to visit Gilles in prison, they tell him that they believe God had taken their daughter because it was her time to go, which Gilles admittedly thinks is odd. Dupont makes an absolutely outlandish statement after hearing Gilles' stories about his tough upbringing. He says he wants to adopt him. He wants to seriously adopt the man that SA'd and then sacrificed his daughter. This is what were they thinking? Then they make a proposition to Norman that when or if he ever gets out of prison, they would love to accept him into their family home. They've gone through so much, and yet they are managing to still be good people. They're better than I will ever be. Could you forgive the person who's killed your daughter? In any case, it seems unlikely that Norman will ever get to move into their family home because his behavior in prison is diabolical. He is excessively violent and notoriously takes advantage of any of the younger men who come in. So he won't be getting out anytime soon. Gilles still thinks the whole thing is mental, so he sent the Dupont parents a letter saying, "Please don't come and visit me anymore." It was making him far too uncomfortable. Maurice's parents, on the other hand, find the whole thing incomprehensible.
Le temps s'est figé et Mauris a toujours pour moi 14 ans. Quand j'entends Pimpare, l'un des deux assassins, dire « Je ne vais quand même pas mourir en prison ». J'ai envie de hurler.
They are far from forgiving either criminal. And although they have left Canada and moved to France, they make sure that they go back for every single appeal trial for parole to try and stop at all costs either men ever getting out of prison. Earlier this year, 2022, Gilles appealed for parole once again, for the 9th time.
Personne ne devait mourir. Ça devait être une agression sexuelle. Oui, on aurait été accusé d'agression sexuelle.
But his case was rejected due to his behavior in prison. For one, they uncovered a whole bunch of pornographic images on his prison laptop, one of which was a young naked girl standing in front of the Jacque-Cartier Bridge, the very bridge in which he had committed his heinous crime. The experts in charge of analysing his mental state say that at present he is still a risk to the public. His next appeal date is set for 2027, at which time he will be 73 years old. This case is completely contrasting to the Kalinka Bamberski case, which, if you've not seen, you can find on our channel page. Remember that famous Yoda saying,
"Do or do not. There is no try."
Reading between the lines, I believe he was probably saying, subscribe to Crime Dog. That's all for this week. Our thoughts go out to the families involved in these horrible murders. Please remember to take care of yourself. Stay safe. À la prochaine. Bisous.